Hello and welcome to the Monday Agenda. I hope you all have had a great start of the year 2019. Today, the Monday Agenda is going to talk to Judge Theodore Meron, who is the president of the International Resedual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals with the United Nations. My viewers of the Monday Agenda would really wish to understand this International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals. What is it really? And how do you operate?
It's a pioneering tribunal in a way, which does not follow the path except in the normative sense, in terms of accountability and fight against impunity, the previous tribunals. In the ICTY and the ICTR, judges worked full-time, which of course amounted to quite a substantial budget expenses for the United Nations. You will understand that the international community from time to time has been quite vocally critical of the cost of international justice. In my own view, those costs were well justified because we have established, since the establishment of the ICTY in 1993 and the establishment of the ICTR in 1994, we have established a new universe of international criminal justice in which people, even of the highest rank, accused of committing atrocity crimes, can be brought to justice and prosecuted, whatever their rank, and be prosecuted according to the entire panoply of human rights and due process norms. When the United Nations Security Council decided to establish this new model of international criminal tribunals, it decided to try to have a model which is more modest and more economical. How did it try to do it? Instead of having ex-judges on full pay, it decided to establish a roster of judges elected by the United Nations. Each election required the absolute majority of vote in the UN General Assembly. So it was something which represented the will and the sentiment of the international community to select the best available judges from all over the world, members of the United Nations, yes, to that court. And then the mandate provided, except for the president, all the judges will be on the roster. Okay. They will not come to Arusha or to The Hague, except if the president asks them to come for a case which requires hearings, either in Arusha or at The Hague. Otherwise, they will do their work remotely, okay, using emails and internet and all the entire panoply of modern technology. So we have established an institution which presented new challenges, but it also represented the desire, responded to the desire of the international community to lessen the cost of the judicial component of international criminal justice. So the Security Council actually gave us good tools for that. It enabled us, for the first time, to give to allocate very important judicial work to single judges instead of panels of 3 judges. And for appeals, it created also possibilities for a panel of 3 judges instead of a panel of 5 judges. Okay. Judges are paid not per week or per month, they are paid per day of work. And if they have an assignment which should be done in half a day, they are paid for half a day. Correct. So as a result of that, we sort of are responding to the requests of the international community to have criminal justice, which is fully responsive to the requirements of human rights and due process, and yet it is less costly for international criminal justice.
So how effective has that been, considering the fact that they're working remotely, they could be working on other cases, for instance, and this could, could be time bound in a way.
You mean other cases in their own,
In their own jurisdiction, absolutely,
Well,
yes.
the way we work it, we have to have, of course, commitment of judges
Yes.
whom we approach, that they will give total priority to the work from the international community, from our mechanism.
Okay.
So when we approach a judge, we try to distribute work equally. So we go from one judge to another, depending on who is next in line.
Okay.
When we approach such a judge, we say, A, are you free to take this assignment?
Okay.
And secondly, is there anything that you have done before which would suggest that you could not approach this case in a totally unprejudiced and objective manner? So the judge would have to tell us, A, that he or she is free, interested. And secondly, that there is the judge did not do or say anything which might create the impression of prejudice, either towards the person who is alleged to have committed crime, or prejudice in favor of the prosecution. He must be, as judges, all judges must be completely impartial and objective.
Okay.
And the system has worked. Now, looking back, I was honored and privileged to have been the first president of the mechanism. I was in on the act of creation.
Okay.
And when you are in on an act of creation,
You want to see that through
you
all
want
the
to see.
way.
And when I'm leaving my presidency, my third term as president, in a few weeks on the 18th of January,
Is that so?
I must tell you, I'm leaving with a very good feeling of leaving behind an institution which is fair, which is respected, which is credible, and which is likely to inspire other institutions to follow this model.
Okay.
So we have had great many challenges, but we worked answers to those challenges. And we worked those answers effectively because judges have cooperated, because we have excellent staff which works with the judges who are far away from the system, and they are extremely efficient. The spirit is one of cooperation and friendship. So I'm leaving at a time when I think the mechanism is at its height of its performance.
You have been the president of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals since March 2012. But how long has the tribunal been in existence for, the Residual Mechanism for Criminal?
We are now in the 7th year.
The 7th year.
The 7th.
In approximately how many issues or cases have you already dealt with since
Well, we have had
establishment?
major cases which we have dealt with. We have had the substantive appeal of Mr. Negarabatware
Okay.
from the ICTR.
ICTR, yes.
We have been dealing with cases of President Karadzic.
Okay, okay.
We have been
yes.
dealing with the case of General Mladic.
Mhm.
As you know, General Mladic has been accused of crimes committed in Srebrenica,
Yes.
the only European genocide committed since the end of the Second World War.
Okay.
We have had a very important case of Stanisław Simatovic, where the ICTY appeals chamber remanded that case for a new trial in the mechanism.
Okay.
So we are still involved in retrying that case from the beginning, which is a very major challenge. That case is still continuing. I mentioned the case of Mladic. The case of Mladic is continuing, and we expect to have that appeal of Mr. Mladic concluded in 2020. We have the case of appeal of Mr. Karadzic, which I mentioned a moment ago, and I am hopeful that that appeal decision, the appeal judgment, will be delivered before the end of the first quarter of 2019. So we're making excellent progress. In the meantime, here in Arusha,
Yes.
we have the major case of a request for a review of a case from Mr. Negerabatware. As you may have seen in the press, my colleagues in Arusha have been busy with a number of 5 challenges of violation of integrity of the court, contempt of court, in the case of Turinabo Italia, where persons accused by the prosecutor of trying to contaminate proceedings in the review case of Mr. Negerabatware have been charged by the prosecutor, indicted, and delivered by Rwanda for trial in Arusha. And their hearings have just begun and have been held very successfully, if I may say so, in the new courtroom which we have in Arusha. A courtroom which we have and which could never have built without the strong support by the government of Tanzania. The government of Tanzania provided the land, provided access roads, provided facilities such as water and electricity, and provided us with loyalty and friendship and hospitality, for which we are so very grateful.
You are on the 6th year now, going to the 7th. Since
Started the 7th.
Yeah, you've started the 7th. And what would you, as the president, say to have been major challenges since it's a new tribunal, it's a new mechanism rather. So I'm sure, and luckily you're the pioneer. So what are some of the key challenges? And well, as you said, you're almost going out in a
Not
couple
as a judge, I will still continue as a judge.
As the president.
As the president.
As the president. And how are some of these challenges been addressed?
Yes. I mean, the challenges were, since we were a completely new model of international tribunals, the challenges were not only new, they were extremely difficult to resolve. But with imagination and proper leadership and extremely loyal and committed staff, I think we overcame those challenges. About 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, on the 11th of December, I presented my swan song report to the UN Security Council. And I must tell you that it was quite a moving moment for me, because the Council, except perhaps for one member, was extremely effusive about the achievements we have made and about the fact that now we have a new International Criminal Tribunal which works according to the entire panoply of due process and human rights and best national and international practices. But let me come back to the need to enumerate some of those practices, or new challenges, more correctly. Here we had to devise a system where we would be able effectively to transfer to judges who are working remotely materials, sometimes confidential materials, with documents which they must read in order properly and fully and carefully do their work as criminal judges. So we, of course, resorted to modern technology, to the internet, to emails, and developed ways to cooperate in such a way that the communications are secure, that they cannot be hacked, hopefully, or accessed to by unauthorized people. We had to devise new methods for judges to deliberate with and to consult staff which would be present and working with the judges, staff which would be either at The Hague or in Arusha. We are the first ever transcontinental tribunal, in the sense that the branches of the mechanism are co-equal. We do not have headquarters in The Hague and a branch in Arusha. We do not have a headquarters in Arusha and a branch in The Hague. We are all equal. And the principle which we follow in our work is one institution principle. We work together. So we may have a case in The Hague for which we would find that it would be more efficient to use a staff member who is in Arusha, and vice versa. So everybody is exchangeable.
Yes.
Judges have access to an assistant, and that assistant can be anywhere in the world, I mean in one of the two branches, and this works. We had to devise ways in which in-person deliberations can also take place whenever required, while reducing the travel cost of the United Nations to the very minimum. I think that looking at those, these are just a few challenges. We had to, the UN Security Council told us we must run a lean institution, a lean institution. They were not happy with the fact that previously both the ICTY and the ICTR, in the view of the budget people in the UN and many governments, was too heavy on personnel, too heavy on costs, too heavy on time that it took. And I can tell you that in this new model, we have not only been able to economize, because we are paying judges not per year, but per days of work, exactly the same system that has already been in practice very many years in the International Court of Justice for the so-called ad hoc judges, but we have at the same time maintained efficiency.
But in terms of, living some of these best practices in Africa, and I must say Tanzania is really highly privileged to, host the tribunal. How do you bring about these new judges? How do they get involved? How do they get to learn some of the fantastic work that you do?
First of all, the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that proceedings that we are conducting are transparent and they are public.
Okay.
So what happens in our courtroom is in principle right away visible on national televisions.
Okay.
In Tanzania and in the neighboring countries.
Okay.
So judges, advocates, students, scholars, academics, journalists, community leaders, religious leaders can actually see how the proceedings are conducted. Then we, as I've mentioned in my press comments today, we have a library which we regard not only as an asset of the mechanism and an asset of the international community, but an asset of Africa, an asset of the region. And our greatest hope with regard to the library is that judges, that lawyers, that students in Tanzania, of course, but not only in Tanzania, but the neighboring country, will come to use our library free of charge. We provided computers, they can do their work there. And whenever they need additional materials, they can approach us about it, and we will help. I mentioned in the press conference today that we had the honor to conduct a year ago or so a judicial colloquium in our courtroom in Arusha, to which we invited the guests and the participants were judges of the Arusha branch of the High Court of Tanzania, judges of the East African Court of Justice, and judges of the African Court on Human and People's Rights. So the African component was dominant, and our object was sharing our knowledge, sharing our experience, inspiring people to follow the values that we have followed, the value of fighting impunity and promoting accountability without taking shortcuts on criminal justice, on fairness. For us, in determining whether somebody is guilty or not, a person who has been charged by the prosecutor, we do not go by political agendas. We do not go by extraneous agendas. We go only by the question whether the law and the evidence should lead us to conviction or to acquittal. Nothing more and nothing else. And by doing so, we have shown that we can have an efficient and credible system of
in terms of confidentiality of the specific issues and access to the library. How are these two looked upon? If you grant access, to what limits?
First of all, let me start the default position. The starting point for us is the public and transparent nature of our proceedings. We have nothing to hide, basically, and we think that an important goal of international criminal justice is served by the open and transparent nature of our proceeding, including, in principle, of the materials, cases, files in a particular case, and eventually materials stored in the archives. Having said so, we must realize that some materials would have to be protected, or access to them should be restricted. Imagine, for example, that there is something about identity of a witness who was protected, whose confidentiality rests on the decision of judges to grant him confidentiality, because were he not or she granted confidentiality, he or she might be intimidated from testifying, and terrible reprisals in some cases could be inflicted on that person or his family or her family,
Yes.
if the identity would be known. So there are some cases which are protected, and access to those materials would not be given.
Absolutely.
But from time to time, and those materials would typically not be in our library, which is totally open, they would be in the archives.
Okay.
The archives, in principle, again, the default principle is open. You can go and look at the material. Protected materials are stored separately and you can gain access to those materials only if there is a judicial decision. Imagine that the prosecutor in Tanzania
Yes.
would say, well, we have a problem with Mr. XY, who is suspected of war crimes which could have been committed, say, in Rwanda or something like that, in 1994. We need some material which is relevant. Now here, judges would look at the request and try to provide that government, those national prosecuting authorities,
Yes.
with as much material as possible, while protecting the essential privacy and confidentiality of that witness, so he would not or she would not be exposed to intimidation and the reprisals.
Okay. Have you ever had an incident whereby a sovereign government or a government wanting to have the proceeding in the country and not at the tribunal? Have you had such instances?
I don't think that this amounted to an incident, because national governments would have been well aware of the limits which our competence and our statute imposes. The statute provides that we will prosecute serious violations of international humanitarian law. Now, the Security Council has somewhat attenuated this principle in providing already a few years ago for the possibility that people of junior rank or even intermediate rank, but not the highest possible authorities accused of atrocity crimes, might be transferred following a decision of the court, of the tribunal, either at The Hague or in Arusha, to trials in national jurisdictions. And some cases have been transferred for trial in Kigali. They are still continuing. We have transferred a number of cases for trial in countries of the former Yugoslavia. We are interested in encouraging national prosecutions and national jurisdictions. We are trying to share with them our experience.
Maybe to interrupt that. My literal thinking is that they're being referred up because there's the sense of feeling like justice cannot be attained in my country. That's why they bring them to further up. Or I mean, what mechanism is in place to decide this case should be listened in the country and this case should be referred up?
Well, please remember that when the tribunal at The Hague was established,
Yes.
when the tribunal in Arusha was established, in The Hague the tribunal was established while the armed conflict in the former Yugoslavia was still ongoing.
Still ongoing. That's
Ongoing.
correct, yes.
You really cannot have independent, neutral, international criminal justice when war is going on next street.
Absolutely.
So you had to establish the court elsewhere to give the required security to witnesses, to people working for the tribunal, to people who are judges. In Rwanda, also don't forget that the tribunal was established, ICTR was established in 1994.
Yes.
The genocide was committed in April 1994.
Correct.
Again, you had interest of security and stability and calm for an international tribunal. So the United Nations chose, I think wisely, Tanzania, because it offered proximity.
Correct.
And a country with established, respected judiciary, a good place for an international criminal tribunal to reside in and operate, knowing that they will have the sympathy and support of the judiciary and the police security apparatus and so on.
Okay.
But over time, as the justice systems in the conflict countries in which we were involved, former Yugoslavia and Rwanda, have improved, we were able, following the granted to the green light given to us by the UN Security Council, we were able, as often as possible, in lower type of responsibility or rank cases, to refer cases for trial in Yugoslavia and in Rwanda, and this is working well. Okay. We have the obligation under our rules to send monitors for trial, and with regard to trials which are being conducted in Kigali, we have obtained the cooperation of the Kenya branch of the International Commission of Jurists, which is a very respected international NGO, to provide monitoring. Okay. And I'm happy to say, and I acknowledge with thanks, the fact that the International Commission of Jurists Kenya branch is not charging for the services. Okay. Wow. But they are only reimbursed on costs. There are no honoraria paid to the monitors, so this is working. We have some cases in France where we also have some monitors who report to us about the progress made and on the fact that the international due process standards are being respected and followed.
Okay. And there are still people on the wanted list by the tribunal, of course, and I'm aware that there's a ransom to that. How is it? Do you receive enough support and cooperation from institutions or bodies like Interpol or the governments in terms of the whereabouts of the possible people on the highly wanted people to stand trials by the tribunal?
Well, first of all, let me make it clear that it is not the mandate of a judge, not the mandate of president of a court to be involved in prosecutions, in investigations, arrest, etc. This is the role of an independent prosecutor, which we have had in the ICTY, in the ICTR, and which we have in the mechanism. So he's the person in charge of both tracking fugitives, as you have rightly pointed out. There are still 3 very senior fugitives accused of atrocity crimes, genocide, etc. in Rwanda, and who have been fugitives from justice for a long time now. So he has a tracking team, he has investigators who are trying to find them, to have them arrested, charged, brought for trial in Arusha, because these are ICTR people, so they will be tried in Arusha. So far, those 3 very senior people have not been arrested. 5 others, who are on the most wanted list, have been transferred, but by Kigali. Contacts with Interpol are part of this, the mandate of the prosecutor, and I'm quite sure, and that he's in close contact with Interpol and other police institutions to try to identify the whereabouts of the fugitives and bring them to justice.
Have you documented the entire process like if other countries wish to learn how you operate in order to reduce cases, in order to reduce, the duration that the case would last, so that, this is a best practice? Is this documented anywhere, and do countries or people have access to study the entire way that the mechanism works?
A number of manuals which describe something that we call best practices. And those practices are our legacy in a way, our recommendation to national jurisdictions and to other international criminal jurisdictions. This is what we tried. These are our failures. These are our disappointments. The rules on that had to be changed in this or that way. This is what we are coming up now with improvements, with remedies. And this is what we recommend to international criminal justice and to national criminal justice. Yes, we have tried that. Have we done it enough? Probably we could have done more if we had greater resources, but definitely what your question presents an aspect of our primary mandate, to establish a legacy that could be followed in national jurisdictions.
What is the way forward?
The way forward is to see how we can have the greatest possible effectiveness and the greatest possible synergy between international jurisdictions and national jurisdictions. With all the goodwill and the greatest efficiency in the world, we are limited in our mandates. We are limited in the number of judges we have. We are limited in the number of staff we have. And we are limited in our jurisdictions. We have jurisdiction over the genocide in Rwanda and over the war crimes which were committed in the former Yugoslavia. We do not have jurisdiction over other countries. We do not have jurisdiction over atrocity crimes in Syria or Iraq, and mention them. It's so disappointing to know that despite the triumph, in a way, and achievements of international criminal justice, we still have so many atrocity crimes, so many killings, so many rapes, so many cases of genocide, so many crimes against humanity which are being committed. So international criminal tribunals will not be able to deal with very many of those cases. We can deal with handfuls of cases where we have the jurisdiction and we have the resources, and we are trying to do that. But in order really to have international criminal justice triumph, impunity departed from, accountability adhered to, we need maximum number of credible prosecutions by nation states, by countries like Rwanda, by countries like Tanzania, by European countries which more and more resort in their courts to the principle of so-called universality of jurisdiction, of prosecuting somebody who does not have a nexus, a link with the particular prosecuting country. But the country exercises jurisdiction because the crimes involved are crimes against the entire humanity. their crimes against international law. So we need that synergy. We must have a greater commitment from nation states to devote resources, to devote budget, and to have the commitment to prosecute war crimes. The more we have of that, the more deterrence we will have for potential war criminals in the future to commit their crimes.
Until next time, I'm your host, Austin Makani, and thank you for watching.